Jasmine Washington stands frozen in the airport terminal as the security guards approach her, called by a white woman who claimed she didn't belong in the first-class lounge. The announcement blares overhead. "This is your captain, Jasmine Washington speaking." The white woman's jaw drops in shock. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Hit that like and subscribe button if you've ever witnessed someone being unfairly judged based on appearances. Now, let's find out how Captain Washington handled this intense situation. Jasmine Washington's alarm blared at 4:30 a.m., though she had been awake for nearly 30 minutes, already mentally reviewing her flight plan. Today wasn't just another day at work. Today, at 34 years old, she was making history as the first black female senior captain on the Atlanta to New York major route. She stretched and climbed out of bed, her apartment quiet except for the gentle hum of the air conditioning fighting against Atlanta's summer heat. The walls of her bedroom told her story. Framed photos of her first solo flight graduation from flight school and her grandparents at her airline induction ceremony. "You got this, Jazz," she whispered to herself as she stepped into the shower, letting the hot water wash away the lingering anxiety dreams that had plagued her sleep. Dreams where the plane controls wouldn't respond, where passengers refused to board, where she forgot everything she'd learned in her 12 years of flying. As she toweled off, Jasmine caught her reflection in the mirror. Dark circles had formed under her eyes, evidence of the extra hours she'd put in reviewing procedures and weather patterns. Being the first meant being flawless. She couldn't afford even minor mistakes that her white male colleagues might easily brush off. The coffee maker gurgled to life as she entered her kitchen, the aroma filling the space as she pulled out a protein shake from the fridge. Her roommate Zara emerged from her bedroom, hair wrapped in a satin scarf, looking surprisingly alert for the early hour. "Today's the big day." Captain Washington. Zara grinned, grabbing a mug from the cabinet. "How are you feeling?" "Like I might throw up," Jasmine admitted, managing a nervous laugh. "But ready. I've been preparing for this route for months." "You're going to crush it," Zara said, squeezing Jasmine's shoulder. "Remember when we were flight attendants together and you'd spend every break studying those technical manuals? Now look at you." Jasmine smiled, remembering those days. While Zara had found her calling in the cabin, Jasmine had always been drawn to the cockpit. The journey from flight attendant to pilot had been grueling. Night school, countless hours in simulators tests, where she scored perfectly, yet still faced questions about her capabilities. "I'm just glad I don't have to wear the uniform to the airport," Jasmine said, selecting comfortable jeans and a simple blouse from her closet. She would change into her captain's uniform at the crew facility. One less thing for TSA to question me about. It had happened more times than she cared to count. Try security officers doing double takes at her pilot ID, asking her to verify details or assuming she was a flight attendant despite the clear credentials. As she dressed, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Her grandmother's smiling face appeared on the screen. "Morning, Grandma," Jasmine answered, her voice softening. "There's my sky girl," her grandmother's warm voice replied. "I've been up praying for you since 3 a.m. Jasmine's throat tightened with emotion. After losing her parents in a car accident when she was 12, her grandparents had raised her working extra shifts to support her dreams of flight. "You didn't have to do that, Grandma." "Of course I did. Big day deserves big prayers." There was a pause. "Your granddaddy would have been so proud." Jasmine blinked back tears, remembering her grandfather's unwavering support before his passing 3 years ago. He had been the one to take her to her first air show, the one who told her she could fly anything with wings if she put her mind to it. "I know," she managed. "I miss him. He's watching baby. Just like I'll be watching the flight tracker app thing you showed me. You call me when you land in New York, you hear?" "Yes, ma'am," Jasmine promised. "How are you feeling today? Did you take your medication?" Her grandmother chuckled. "Don't you worry about me. I managed a whole nursing career with folks questioning whether a black woman could handle medical responsibilities. I'm made of tough stuff just like you." The stories of her grandmother's struggles as one of the first black nurses at Atlanta General had been bedtime tales throughout Jasmine's childhood. Tales of resilience, of excellence in the face of doubt, of maintaining dignity when others tried to strip it away. "I learned from the best," Jasmine said. After saying goodbye, Jasmine finished her preparations, carefully packing her flight bag with her license logbook and charts. Her phone buzzed with a text from Aaron, a fellow pilot she'd been dating for 8 months. "Knock 'em dead today, Captain. Proud of you. Dinner when you get back." She smiled, typing back a quick affirmative before requesting an Uber. As she waited, she stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline, thinking about the long journey from her childhood home in South Side to where she stood now. The doubters, the microaggressions, the professors who seemed surprised by her aptitude, the passengers who had questioned her abilities. Today felt like vindication for all of it. Today, she wasn't just flying for herself, but for every little girl who looked like her and dreamed of soaring. The Uber arrived, breaking her reverie. Jasmine grabbed her bags, took a deep breath, and headed out the door, ready to make history. The sprawling expanse of Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport was already pulsing with activity when Jasmine's Uber pulled up to the departures level. She tipped generously and stepped out into the humid Georgia morning, the familiar sounds and smells of jet fuel and hurried travelers greeting her like old friends. Despite her years of experience navigating these terminals, Jasmine felt a flutter of nerves. Today wasn't just about proving herself as a pilot. It was about claiming space as a senior captain, a position where black women were virtually invisible in the industry. She moved with practiced efficiency through the crew security line, her pilot credentials and ID ready. The TSA agent, an older white man with salt and pepper hair, glanced at her credentials, then back at her. "Flight attendant," he asked, despite the pilot designation clearly visible on her ID. Captain Jasmine corrected calmly, maintaining eye contact. It was a dance she knew all too well, the assumption, the correction, the surprise, poorly masked as acknowledgement. "Right, sorry ma'am," he mumbled, waving her through after a more thorough inspection of her documents than she had witnessed for the white male pilot ahead of her. Once past security, Jasmine checked her watch. She had time for coffee before heading to the crew briefing room. The terminal was crowded with morning passengers, most plugged into phones or laptops, creating a bubble of isolation in the public space. She joined the line at Skybean, a coffee shop near her gate, mentally reviewing the day's flight plan. The weather report had shown possible turbulence over the Appalachians, but nothing major that would affect their flight path to JFK. Next customer called the barista, a young man with a name tag reading Malcolm. "Morning," Jasmine smiled. "Medium dark roast black, please." Malcolm nodded, grabbing a cup. "Flying somewhere nice today?" he asked, making conversation as he worked. "New York," she replied. "Cool. What time's your flight? I can mark the cup with your boarding time if you want a reminder." "I'm actually the captain on the 845 to JFK," Jasmine said, sliding her credit card across the counter. Malcolm paused, cup in hand. "Oh, sorry, I just assumed. I mean, that's awesome. First time I've met a female pilot." "We're out there," Jasmine said lightly, though she noted he hadn't specified black female pilot, which was likely the real source of his surprise. "Right on," Malcolm recovered, finishing her coffee and handing it over. "Safe travels, Captain." Jasmine thanked him and moved toward the first-class lounge. As a senior captain, she had access to review her flight plans in the quieter, more comfortable space before heading to the pre-flight briefing. She needed to check the latest weather updates and review the passenger manifest. At the lounge entrance, a security guard named Lawrence, whom she recognized from previous flights, greeted her with a nod. "Morning, Captain Washington. Big day, I hear. First time as senior on this route." News travels fast. Jasmine smiled, appreciating his recognition. "We're proud of you," he said, his voice lowered slightly. As a fellow black professional in the airport, there was an unspoken understanding between them about what her achievement meant. Inside the lounge, the atmosphere shifted. The space was designed for comfort and exclusivity, with plush seating, complimentary food and beverages, and a noticeably whiter, wealthier clientele than the general terminal. Jasmine felt the familiar weight of eyes tracking her as she entered the quick assessments and assumptions being made. She chose a quiet corner with a table where she could spread out her materials. As she settled in, she became aware of a woman staring at her from across the lounge. White, in her early 60s, immaculately dressed in a designer suit, with perfectly coiffed blonde hair and jewelry that probably cost more than Jasmine's monthly rent. The woman was speaking loudly into her phone, making little effort to moderate her volume. Standards have really gone downhill. They just let anyone in these days. I remember when first class actually meant something. Jasmine kept her expression neutral, opening her laptop and focusing on the weather reports. It wasn't the first time she'd heard comments like this, and it wouldn't be the last. The trick was not letting it affect her performance. The woman, who would later identify herself as Eleanor Whitfield, continued her conversation, her voice carrying deliberately across the lounge. Other passengers occasionally glanced up, some with discomfort, others with apparent agreement. Paid good money for exclusivity. Now look around. It's becoming like the general terminal. Jasmine sipped her coffee, reviewing the passenger manifest that had just loaded on her screen. Her eyes caught on a name: Whitfield Eleanor. Seat 2 amperes. First class. On her flight. Perfect. Jasmine checked the crew list, confirming that First Officer Benjamin Chen would be her co-pilot today. She had flown with Ben several times before and respected his skills in the cockpit. The cabin crew was led by Chief Flight Attendant Alicia Rodriguez, another professional she trusted completely. As she reviewed the details, she felt, rather than saw, Eleanor Whitfield approaching her table. Jasmine took a deep breath, squared her shoulders, and prepared for the interaction she knew was coming. One that countless black professionals faced in spaces where their presence was still seen as an anomaly rather than a right. Eleanor Whitfield stood over Jasmine's table. Her shadow falling across the flight plans spread neatly across the surface. The lounge had quieted slightly, as if the other passengers sensed the brewing confrontation and were settling in for the show. "Excuse me," Eleanor said, her voice carrying the practiced politeness that barely masked contempt. "May I see your lounge access credentials?" Jasmine looked up, maintaining a neutral expression. This wasn't her first rodeo with entitled passengers who appointed themselves gatekeepers of spaces they believed black people didn't belong in. "I'm sorry," Jasmine asked, giving the woman a chance to reconsider her approach. "Your credentials," Eleanor repeated, gesturing vaguely toward Jasmine's belongings. "This is the first-class lounge. I just want to make sure you're in the right place." Jasmine took a measured breath. "I am in the right place, ma'am. I'm the captain on the 845 flight to JFK." Eleanor's eyebrows rose, skepticism evident. "You, the pilot?" She let out a short, incredulous laugh. "No, really. Are you with the cleaning service, or perhaps a flight attendant?" The staff lounge is in a different terminal section. The nearby passengers were now openly watching. A businessman 2 tables over lowered his newspaper, frowning at the exchange. A young couple exchanged uncomfortable glances. "I'm the captain," Jasmine repeated firmly, reaching into her bag to retrieve her airline ID. "Captain Jasmine Washington. And yes, I have every right to be in this lounge." Eleanor made no move to look at the ID, instead crossing her arms across her chest. "I've been flying first class for 30 years, and I've never seen a captain who looked like, well, I find it hard to believe the airline would put someone so inexperienced in charge of an aircraft." "My experience isn't determined by my appearance, ma'am," Jasmine replied, her voice calm but firm. "I've been flying commercially for 12 years and have over 100,000 flight hours." An attendant named Tyler approached, having noticed the escalating situation. He was young, perhaps in his mid-20s, with a name tag indicating he was new to the lounge staff. "Is everything all right here?" he asked. glancing nervously between the two women. "No, it is not," Eleanor said, before Jasmine could respond. "I'm concerned about security in this lounge. This woman claims to be a pilot, but I have serious doubts." Tyler's eyes widened in recognition as he looked at Jasmine. "Captain Washington, I didn't realize you were flying today. Can I get you anything before your flight? We've just brought in fresh pastries." Eleanor's expression soured further. "You know this person." Of course, Tyler nodded. "Captain Washington flies this route regularly. She's one of our most experienced pilots." "Ridiculous," Eleanor muttered. "I need to speak to your management immediately. This is clearly some sort of diversity stunt by the airline." Other passengers were now visibly uncomfortable. A middle-aged black woman at a nearby table caught Jasmine's eye and gave her a subtle nod of solidarity. "Ma'am," Tyler said, his customer service voice strained, "I can assure you that Captain Washington is fully qualified and authorized to be here." "The only misunderstanding," Eleanor said loudly, "is how someone like her snuck into this position. In my day, there were standards, proper qualifications, not just handouts based on how you look." Jasmine felt a familiar heat rising in her chest, the burn of having her entire career, her thousands of hours of training, her multiple certifications reduced to an accusation of preferential treatment. She'd faced this countless times, the assumption that she hadn't earned her place through merit, but had somehow cheated the system. "Tyler," Jasmine said quietly, "it's all right. I have work to complete before my flight." She turned back to her flight plans, attempting to dismiss the woman and defuse the situation. But Eleanor wasn't finished. "I demand to see the lounge manager," she insisted, her voice rising. "And security. I don't feel safe with people sneaking in where they don't belong." Tyler hesitated, caught between protocol and what was clearly an inappropriate request. "Ma'am, I've verified that Captain Washington." "Call security." Eleanor cut him off, pulling out her cell phone. "If you won't, I will. I have the airport security number saved from previous incidents." A ripple of murmurs spread through the lounge. Jasmine remained outwardly calm, though her heart rate had increased. Scenes like this had played out in various forms throughout her career. The questioning, the doubt, the accusations, but rarely with such public hostility. "This is Eleanor Whitfield," the woman spoke into her phone. "I'm in the first-class lounge at Terminal B, and there's an unauthorized person who refuses to leave." "Yes, I'll hold." Tyler looked desperately at Jasmine, who gave him a slight nod. There was no point escalating the situation further. Let security come. They would verify her identity, and the incident would become yet another story she'd tell younger black pilots about the obstacles they might face. "Security is on their way," Eleanor announced triumphantly, ending her call and addressing the lounge at large. "We paid too much for these amenities to have just anyone walking in off the street." A tense silence fell over the space. Jasmine felt the weight of eyes on her, some sympathetic, others curious, a few seemingly in agreement with Eleanor. The familiar knot formed in her stomach, the one that appeared whenever she was forced to justify her existence in spaces others took for granted. She checked her watch. 30 minutes until she needed to meet her crew for briefing. 30 minutes of this woman's vitriol before she could escape to the professional sanctuary of the cockpit. Jasmine took a slow sip of her now lukewarm coffee and straightened her spine. Another day, another battle, just to exist in her space. But she hadn't come this far to be driven out now. The minutes that followed Eleanor's call stretched like taffy, creating an uncomfortable bubble of tension in the otherwise serene first-class lounge. Jasmine continued reviewing her flight plans with deliberate focus, refusing to give Eleanor the satisfaction of appearing rattled. Inside, however, her mind cataloged this incident alongside the countless others that peppered her career. The passenger who had requested a different pilot after seeing her during boarding, the flight instructor who had tested her more rigorously than her white male classmates, the countless "Are you sure you're the pilot?" questions that had become a refrain in her professional life. The lounge doors swung open and 2 security officers entered. Damon Johnson, a tall black man in his 40s whom Jasmine recognized from previous shifts, scanned the room with practiced efficiency. Beside him stood Keith Mendoza, younger and seemingly less experienced, his gaze following Damon's lead. Eleanor straightened, raising her hand to beckon them over, like a teacher selecting a student to answer a question. "Officers, thank you for responding so quickly," she said, her voice carrying across the lounge. "This woman here has been refusing to show proper credentials and became quite combative when questioned." Damon approached, recognition flashing in his eyes as he spotted Jasmine. "Captain Washington," he said with a respectful nod. "Is there a problem here?" Before Jasmine could respond, Eleanor interjected. "Yes, there certainly is. This woman claims to be a pilot, which is clearly—" "She is a pilot, ma'am." Damon interrupted his tone, professional but firm. "Captain Washington flies regularly out of this airport. I've personally seen her credentials numerous times." Eleanor's mouth opened, then closed, her certainty momentarily shaken. She recovered quickly. "Well, she hasn't shown them to me, and I have concerns about security protocols being followed properly." Keith stepped forward. "Ma'am, would you mind coming with me for a moment?" He gestured Eleanor a few steps away, likely to explain the situation without further disrupting the lounge. Damon turned to Jasmine. "I apologize for the disturbance, Captain. Would you like to file a complaint about this incident?" Jasmine shook her head slightly. "Not necessary, Officer Johnson. I have a flight to prepare for." "Understood," he said, his eyes conveying what his professional demeanor couldn't: solidarity, a shared understanding of what was really happening here. Across the lounge, several passengers had their phones angled in their direction, undoubtedly recording the exchange. Jasmine's stomach tightened. Would this be the next viral video? Another black professional having their credentials questioned, their presence deemed suspicious. As Damon stepped away to join his colleague, Jasmine noticed a familiar face entering the lounge. Benjamin Chen, her first officer for today's flight, scanned the area and quickly assessed the situation. At 38, Ben had been flying almost as long as Jasmine and had earned a reputation for being unflappable in the cockpit and fiercely loyal to his colleagues. He approached her, table eyebrows raised in silent question. "Just the usual," Jasmine said quietly. "Apparently, I don't look like I belong here." Ben's expression darkened as he glanced toward Eleanor, who was gesticulating emphatically to Keith. "Want me to say something?" "It's handled," Jasmine replied, gathering her flight documents. "Security's already verified. I'm not an imposter." Ben shook his head, clearly unsatisfied with the resolution. "This is unacceptable, Jazz, and prejudiced as hell." "Tell me something I don't know," she said, attempting a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Ben squared his shoulders, and despite Jasmine's subtle headshake of warning, strode toward Eleanor and Keith. Jasmine suppressed a groan. Ben's intentions were good, but confrontation would only escalate the situation. "Excuse me," Ben's voice carried clearly. "I couldn't help overhearing. I'm First Officer Chen, flying with Captain Washington today. Is there a problem with my captain?" Eleanor's expression wavered between surprise and indignation. "I was simply ensuring proper security protocols were being followed. Anyone could walk in claiming to be staff." "Captain Washington has been flying for 12 years, Ben said. "She's one of the most respected pilots in our fleet. Your behavior toward her is completely unacceptable." Other passengers were now openly staring, some nodding in agreement with Ben, others looking uncomfortable with the confrontation. "I was just being cautious," Eleanor defended her voice, taking on a wounded tone. "Anyone would do the same. It's not about what you're implying, isn't it?" Ben challenged. "Would you have questioned me if I'd been sitting alone, or any of the other passengers here?" Eleanor's face flushed. "This is ridiculous. I'm a platinum member with over 1 million miles. I've never been treated so disrespectfully." Jasmine checked her watch, noting she needed to proceed to pre-flight procedures soon. she stood and approached the group, her captain's briefcase in hand. "Ben," she said quietly, "we need to prep for our flight." He nodded, reluctantly, still glaring at Eleanor. As they turned to leave, a new figure hurried into the lounge. Patricia Davis, the airline's customer service manager, approached with a concerned expression. She was in her 50s with a no-nonsense demeanor that had earned her respect throughout the terminal. "Captain Washington," she said, "I just heard what happened. I came immediately." "Thank you, Patricia," Jasmine replied. "But it's resolved now." Patricia turned to Eleanor, her professional smile firmly in place but her eyes hard. "Miss Whitfield, I understand there was a misunderstanding regarding Captain Washington's credentials." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Eleanor insisted. "It was a legitimate security concern. Our security team has verified Captain Washington's identity," Patricia stated. "She is indeed the captain of your flight to New York this morning." Eleanor's expression cycled through disbelief, embarrassment, and finally, a defensive indignation. "Well, how was I supposed to know? She doesn't look like a typical pilot." The lounge fell silent at this naked admission. Patricia's smile didn't waver. "Captain Washington is one of our most experienced pilots with an exemplary record. I'm sure she'll provide you with an excellent flight experience today." She turned to Jasmine. "Captain, what would you like us to do in this situation? What do you think about Eleanor's behavior in this situation? Did she have a valid concern about security, or was she acting from a place of prejudice?" Comment number 1, if you believe there's never an excuse for making assumptions about people based on their appearance. Like and subscribe if you've ever had to prove you belong somewhere others assumed you didn't. And what would you do in Jasmine's position now? She has several options. She could have Eleanor removed from the flight file, a formal complaint, or take a different approach entirely. What would be the most powerful response to this situation? Let's find out what Captain Washington decides. Jasmine stood at the crossroads of a decision that felt all too familiar: how to respond when someone questioned her very right to exist in the space she had earned through years of dedication and excellence. The first-class lounge had fallen into an uncomfortable silence, all eyes on her as Patricia awaited her answer. Her mind raced through her options. She could have Eleanor removed from the flight, a satisfaction that might feel vindicating in the moment, but would likely fuel a woman's prejudice. She could file a formal complaint, generating paperwork that would probably be filed away and forgotten. Or she could find a different way, one that might actually make a difference. "Ben," Jasmine said quietly, turning to her first officer. "Could you give me a moment?" Ben nodded, though reluctance showed in his eyes. He stepped away, joining Patricia a few feet distant, still keeping a watchful eye on the situation. Jasmine gestured to a nearby empty table. "Miss Whitfield, would you join me briefly?" Eleanor hesitated, clearly surprised by the request. After a moment's consideration, she gave a curt nod and followed Jasmine to the table. They sat across from each other, the tension between them almost palpable. "I want to understand." Jasmine began, her voice measured. "What made you so certain I didn't belong here?" Eleanor shifted uncomfortably. "As I said, it was a security concern, nothing more." "Was it?" Jasmine asked, maintaining steady eye contact. "Because in my 12 years of flying, I've observed something interesting. The passengers who look like you don't get questioned about belonging. They don't get stopped by security. They don't have to repeatedly prove their credentials." Eleanor opened her mouth to object, but Jasmine continued. "This isn't the first time I've experienced this. On my first solo flight as a commercial pilot, 3 passengers requested a different pilot after seeing me during boarding. They hadn't seen me fly, hadn't seen me handle turbulence, or navigate complex weather systems. They simply saw my face and decided I wasn't qualified." A flicker of discomfort crossed Eleanor's features. "Do you know what happened on that flight?" Jasmine asked. Eleanor remained silent. "We hit unexpected turbulence over Colorado, severe enough that 2 other aircraft had to divert. I navigated through it smoothly, landed safely, and those same 3 passengers apologized afterward. Jasmine leaned forward slightly. Not because I had suddenly become more qualified during the flight, but because they had been forced to see past their preconceptions. The lounge remained quiet, passengers and staff alike tuned into their conversation despite pretending otherwise. "I'm not going to have you removed from my flight today, Miss Whitfield," Jasmine said finally. Relief visibly washed over Eleanor, quickly followed by confusion. "You're not?" "No. In fact, I see you're seated in 2 amperes. That's a good seat. Clear view of the cockpit door. You'll be able to watch me work." Eleanor's brow furrowed uncertainty, replacing her earlier indignation. Ben approached, having evidently overheard. "Jazz, are you sure about this? Nobody would blame you for having her reassigned." Jasmine stood gathering her materials. "I'm sure. Miss Whitfield and I will be sharing a flight today. Perhaps we'll both learn something." Patricia stepped forward, her expression a mixture of respect and concern. "Captain Washington, you have my full support for whatever action you deem appropriate. If you change your mind at any point, just say the word." "Thank you, Patricia, but my decision stands." Jasmine checked her watch. "I need to prepare for boarding. Ben, shall we?" As they turned to leave, Eleanor called out Captain Washington. Jasmine paused, turning back. Eleanor seemed to struggle with her words. I still have concerns about experience levels." Jasmine nodded once. "Noted, Miss Whitfield. I'll see you on board." As they exited the lounge, Ben shook his head in disbelief. "I don't know how you do it, Jazz. I'd have had her bumped to economy in the last row by the lavatory." Jasmine managed a small smile. Then she'd leave, with her prejudice intact, maybe even strengthened. This way she has to sit there and watch you expertly pilot the plane Ben finished, making her confront her bias directly. "Something like that," Jasmine agreed. They walked in silence for a moment before Ben spoke again. "It's not fair that you always have to be the bigger person, that the burden of education falls on you instead of people educating themselves." Jasmine sighed. "No, it's not fair, but it's reality. And if taking the higher road means one more person might reconsider their assumptions about who belongs in a cockpit, then it's worth it. Not just for me, but for every black girl who dreams of flying." As they approached the crew area, Jasmine felt the weight of the encounter settling on her shoulders. The constant vigilance, the need to be twice as good, to be considered half as qualified. The emotional labor of educating others about their biases, it was exhausting. Yet she straightened her spine and pushed forward, as she always did. She had a flight to captain, and she would do it with the excellence that had carried her through every obstacle so far. Eleanor Whitfield might have questioned her right to be in the first-class lounge, but she would have no grounds to question Jasmine's mastery of the skies. The crew locker room provided a momentary sanctuary as Jasmine changed into her captain's uniform. She methodically buttoned her crisp white shirt, straightened her epaulets displaying 4 gold stripes, and adjusted her tie with practiced precision. The routine was calming a physical transformation that somehow made the earlier confrontation feel distant, like it had happened to someone else. The mirror reflected back Captain Washington. Now not just Jasmine, an identity she had fought for, earned through thousands of flight hours, sleepless nights, studying technical manuals, and navigating both literal and metaphorical turbulence. As she smoothed her jacket, Alicia Rodriguez, the chief flight attendant assigned to today's flight, entered the locker room. Her expression indicated news had traveled fast. "I heard what happened in the lounge," Alicia said, opening her locker beside Jasmine's. "That woman has some nerve." Jasmine exhaled slowly. "Nothing I haven't dealt with before." "Doesn't make it right," Alicia replied, changing into her uniform with efficient movements. "You know I got 3 passengers last week who asked if there was a real pilot on board after they saw you during pre-boarding inspection." "What did you tell them?" Jasmine asked. though she could guess the answer. Alicia's eyes glinted. I said they were looking at one of the best pilots in the fleet with more flight hours than most of the men, and if that wasn't real enough for them, they were welcome to wait for the next flight. In 3 days. Despite herself, Jasmine laughed. I bet that went over well. They stayed on board. Alicia shrugged. And guess what? We didn't crash. Imagine that. The door opened again, and 2 more flight attendants entered. Derek Johnson and Maya Patel, both experienced crew members whom Jasmine had worked with previously. Captain Derek nodded in greeting. Heard there was some excitement in the lounge. News travels fast around here, Jasmine remarked. Airport's worse than a small town for gossip. Maya agreed, opening her locker. Is it true you're letting that woman stay on the flight? Jasmine nodded, adjusting her hat. She'll be in 2 amperes. The 3 flight attendants exchanged glances. Your call, Captain Alicia said, though. Her tone suggested she might have made a different one. But we've got your back either way. I appreciate that, Jasmine replied sincerely. As she finished preparing, Jasmine's thoughts drifted to the countless similar incidents throughout her career. The constant need to prove herself to be beyond reproach. The subtle and not so subtle messages that she was an interloper in spaces traditionally dominated by white men. She remembered her first day at flight school, walking into a classroom of 30 students, 28 men, 26 of them white, and feeling the weight of their stares. The instructor, who had mistaken her for a lost administrative assistant, the flight evaluator who had grilled her on emergency procedures well beyond the standard examination, only nodding, with reluctant approval, when she answered every question perfectly. The locker room gradually filled with the remaining crew members for their flight. Conversations flowed around her weekend plans, family updates, complaints about schedule changes, normal work chatter that momentarily pushed the Eleanor incident to the background. At precisely the scheduled time, Jasmine gathered her flight materials and headed to the briefing room. As captain, she would lead the pre-flight crew briefing, setting the tone for the entire journey. The briefing room was standard, a rectangular table surrounded by chairs, screens displaying weather maps and flight data, and a coffee station in the corner that had likely seen better days. Ben was already there, reviewing last-minute weather updates on his tablet. As the crew filed in and took their seats, Jasmine felt a familiar sense of belonging wash over her. Here, her authority was established. Here, the stripes on her shoulders spoke louder than any prejudice. Good morning, everyone, she began, her voice clear and confident. I'm Captain Washington, and this is First Officer Chen. We're operating Flight 1372 to JFK today. Scheduled departure at 8:45 a.m., arrival at 11:03 a.m. Eastern. Flight time is approximately 2 hours and 18 minutes. She proceeded with the briefing, covering weather conditions clear in Atlanta, potential light turbulence over the Appalachians, scattered clouds in New York, technical aspects of the aircraft and safety protocols. The crew listened attentively, asking relevant questions and making notes. We're expecting a full flight today. 162 passengers, including 16 inches first class, Jasmine continued. We have 3 passengers requiring wheelchair assistance at JFK, and 1 service animal in cabin, a support dog in 14C. Jasmine deliberately made no mention of the incident with Eleanor Whitfield. This briefing was about the safe and efficient operation of their flight, not personal conflicts. Any questions or concerns before we proceed to the aircraft, she asked, concluding the formal portion of the briefing. The crew responded with various head shakes and no captain responses. Excellent! Let's have a safe and smooth flight today. Thank you all for your professionalism. As the briefing ended and crew members gathered their belongings, Garrett Wilson, the ground crew coordinator, stepped into the room. Captain Washington, just wanted to let you know that boarding will begin in approximately 15 minutes. The aircraft is fully fueled and catering has completed loading. Thank you, Garrett. Any maintenance issues I should be aware of? None, Captain. The aircraft just came in from Dallas without incident. All systems are green." Jasmine nodded her thanks, collecting her flight bag and hat. It was time for the external inspection, her personal check of the aircraft that would carry them safely to New York. No matter how many times she had performed this ritual, she never skipped steps or rushed through it. Safety was paramount, a responsibility she carried not just for herself, but for every passenger and crew member on board. As she walked toward the jetway, her captain's stripes caught the fluorescent lighting of the terminal gleaming gold against the dark fabric of her uniform. She felt the familiar mixture of anxiety and determination, the weight of being not just a pilot, but a representative, a pioneer, a symbol. Eleanor Whitfield might have questioned her place in the first-class lounge, but in minutes, Jasmine would take command of a multi-million-dollar aircraft and the lives of everyone on board. Not because of how she looked, but because she had earned that right through skill, dedication, and excellence. The thought straightened her spine and lifted her chin as she stepped onto the jetway, ready for the pre-flight inspection and the journey ahead. The tarmac hummed with activity as Jasmine conducted her external inspection of the Boeing 737. She moved methodically around the aircraft, checking control surfaces, inspecting the landing gear, examining engine intakes for any signs of damage or debris. The morning sun glinted off the plane's polished exterior as ground crew loaded the last of the luggage into the cargo hold. This ritual, this thorough examination of the machine she would soon command, centered her. Here, surrounded by the sounds of jet engines and the smell of aviation fuel, her expertise was unquestioned. Her authority derived from knowledge and skill, not from others' perceptions of who should possess that authority. Satisfied with the external inspection, Jasmine climbed the stairs to the aircraft door. Inside, the cabin crew was completing final preparations, checking emergency equipment, securing galleys, ensuring the cabin was ready for passengers. Alicia approached as Jasmine entered. "Cabin is prepared, Captain. We're ready for boarding whenever you give the word." "Thank you, Alicia. Let's do final flight deck checks, and then we'll begin." In the cockpit, Ben was already running through his portion of the pre-flight checklist. The space was compact but organized, with every switch screen and control positioned for optimal function rather than comfort. "Systems check complete," Ben reported, as Jasmine settled into the left seat, the captain's position. "APU running electrical systems, normal hydraulics pressurized, and normal." "Thank you, First Officer," Jasmine replied, beginning her own sequence of checks. Her fingers moved across the panels with practiced precision, her mind fully engaged with the task at hand. The radio crackled. "Atlantic 1372 ground crew reports all clear below. Catering and fueling complete. Passenger boarding can commence at your discretion." "Roger that," Jasmine responded. "We're ready to receive passengers." She nodded to Ben, and they both stood straightening their uniforms before moving to the aircraft door. As Senior Captain, Jasmine would stand at the entrance to greet first-class passengers, a courtesy that allowed them to see who would be flying their plane. On most days, this was a pleasant formality. Today, knowing that Eleanor Whitfield would be among those first-class passengers, it took on a different significance. "Ready for this?" Ben asked quietly as they positioned themselves by the door. "Always," Jasmine replied, her professional smile firmly in place. The jetway door opened, and the gate agent began the boarding process. "Good morning. We're now boarding Atlantic Flight 1372 to New York JFK, beginning with our first-class passengers and those needing special assistance." The first passengers appeared a businessman absorbed in his phone, followed by an elderly couple who smiled warmly at Jasmine and Ben. A mother with twin toddlers received extra attention from the flight attendants who helped her settle the children into their seats. Then Eleanor Whitfield appeared at the aircraft door. She was impeccably dressed in a designer suit, her blonde hair perfectly styled, diamond studs glinting in her ears. What was missing was the confidence she had displayed in the lounge. Instead, her eyes widened slightly as she recognized Jasmine in her full captain's uniform, 4 gold stripes prominent on her shoulders. "Good morning, Miss Whitfield," Jasmine said pleasantly. "Welcome aboard Atlantic Flight 1372 to New York." Eleanor's composure faltered momentarily. She hadn't expected to come face to face with the woman she had tried to have removed from the first-class lounge less than an hour ago. Certainly not with that woman now clearly in command of the aircraft. Good morning," she managed, her eyes darting between Jasmine's face and her captain's insignia. "You're in seat 2 amperes, Jasmine continued smoothly. "It's on the left-hand side, just a few rows down. Alicia will help you get settled." Eleanor hesitated, as if wanting to say something more, but merely nodded and moved into the cabin. Alicia, who had overheard the exchange, gave Jasmine a subtle thumbs up before escorting Eleanor to her seat. The boarding process continued. Some passengers did double takes upon seeing Jasmine, their surprise quickly masked. Others smiled warmly or showed no reaction at all. A young black girl, perhaps 9 or 10 years old, stared at Jasmine with undisguised awe. "Are you really the pilot?" she asked, her voice hushed with admiration. "I am," Jasmine confirmed, smiling genuinely. "I'm the captain of this flight." "I want to be a pilot too," the girl confided. "Study hard in science and math," Jasmine told her. "The sky will be waiting for you." The girl beamed as her mother gently guided her into the cabin, throwing a grateful look at Jasmine over her shoulder. As general boarding continued, Jasmine observed Eleanor through the cabin door. She sat rigidly in 2 amperes, seemingly avoiding interaction with the crew. At one point, she attempted to get Derek's attention, perhaps hoping to speak with a different crew member, but when he approached, she merely requested a pre-departure water. When boarding was nearly complete, Jasmine returned to the cockpit to continue preparations. She and Ben worked in tandem, each responsible for specific checks and procedures, their movements efficient and synchronized from years of training. Final passenger count is 162, all accounted for, Alicia reported, appearing at the cockpit door. Cabin is secure for departure. "Thank you, Alicia," Jasmine acknowledged. "We're expecting some light chop over the Appalachians, but otherwise a smooth flight. I'll keep you updated." As Alicia turned to leave, she paused. "Just so you know, our friend in 2 amperes tried to speak to 3 different crew members, apparently looking for someone in charge. Maya told her that would be Captain Washington." Ben suppressed a smile as he continued inputting data into the flight management system. "Copy that," Jasmine said professionally, though she couldn't help a small sense of satisfaction. "Let's focus on giving all our passengers a safe, comfortable flight today." The cabin door closed with a distinctive thunk, and the ground crew removed the jetway. Jasmine completed the final pre-departure checks, communicating with air traffic control to receive their clearance and taxi instructions. As the engines spooled up with their characteristic whine, Jasmine reached for the PA system. It was time for her first announcement, the one that would formally introduce her to all passengers as the commander of their aircraft. She took a deep breath, centered herself, and pressed the button. "Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Captain Jasmine Washington speaking. On behalf of Atlantic Airlines and our entire crew, I'd like to welcome you aboard Flight 1372 to New York JFK. Our flying time today will be approximately 2 hours and 18 minutes, putting us on the ground in New York around 11:03 a.m. Eastern Time." Jasmine's voice carried clearly through the cabin speakers, professional and confident. Through the open cockpit door, she could see the reaction of passengers in the first few rows, including Eleanor Whitfield, whose posture had stiffened noticeably at the sound of her name. "We're currently 3rd in line for departure and should be airborne in about 10 minutes. Weather en route looks good, though we may experience some light turbulence as we cross the Appalachian Mountains. I'll turn the seatbelt sign off once we reach our cruising altitude of 3,700 feet. But I do recommend keeping your seatbelts fastened whenever you're seated, as turbulence can occur unexpectedly. She concluded with the standard safety reminders and thanks, then handed off to Alicia for the detailed safety briefing. As Jasmine turned back to her instruments, Ben gave her a subtle nod of approval. "Smooth as always, Captain," he remarked, completing the last items on their pre-takeoff checklist. The ground crew gave them clearance to push back from the gate, and Jasmine guided the aircraft through the complex choreography of taxiing at one of the world's busiest airports. Each movement was precise, each communication with tower clear and concise. "Atlantic 1372, you are cleared for takeoff on runway 27R. The controller's voice crackled through their headsets. "Atlantic 1372 cleared for takeoff. Runway 27R. Jasmine confirmed, guiding the aircraft into position. She advanced the throttle smoothly, feeling the powerful surge as the engines responded. The airplane accelerated down the runway, gaining speed until Jasmine called V1. Rotate and pulled back on the control column. The 737 responded immediately, nose-lifting wheels, leaving the ground as they climbed into the clear Georgia sky. This moment, the transition from Earth to air, never lost its magic for her, regardless of how many times she experienced it. As they climbed through 1,000 feet, Ben handled the radio communications, while Jasmine focused on the aircraft's trajectory. The city of Atlanta fell away beneath them, the sprawling metropolis shrinking into a pattern of roads and buildings as they ascended into the blue. Once they reached cruising altitude, Jasmine engaged the autopilot, though her hands remained near the controls, ready to take over if needed. The forecast had been accurate, smooth air so far, with scattered clouds below them. "I'm going to check on the cabin," Ben said, after they'd completed the cruise checklist. "Need anything?" "I'm good," Jasmine replied. "Just the usual coffee when you come back." While Ben was gone, Jasmine monitored their progress, making minor adjustments to their course to optimize fuel efficiency. The weather radar showed a band of precipitation ahead, not severe, but likely to cause some turbulence. When Ben returned with 2 cups of coffee, Jasmine briefed him on the approaching weather system. "Looks like we'll hit that band in about 20 minutes. Nothing major, but probably enough to bounce us around a bit." "I'll let the cabin crew know," Ben said, reaching for the interphone. As predicted, they encountered the turbulence about 20 minutes later. The aircraft began to pitch and roll slightly as they entered the disturbed air. Jasmine disengaged the autopilot, preferring to hand fly through the rough patch. This was second nature to her, feeling the airplane responding to its movements, working with rather than against the natural forces. The fasten seatbelt chime sounded as Jasmine turned on the sign. She picked up the PA system once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Washington. As expected, we've encountered some turbulence. I've turned on the seatbelt sign, so please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts. Flight attendants, please suspend service and secure the cabin." The turbulence intensified for a few minutes, the aircraft occasionally dropping suddenly before rising again. Jasmine maintained precise control, making small, smooth inputs to counteract the worst of the bumps. From her years of experience, she knew this was mild compared to what a commercial pilot might encounter, but it could still be unnerving for passengers. Through the partly open cockpit door, Alicia appeared briefly. "Miss Whitfield in 2 amperes is asking to speak to whoever's really in charge during the turbulence," she reported, not bothering to hide her eye roll. "Let me guess, she wants a more experienced pilot." Jasmine asked, her focus remaining on her instruments. "That's the implication," Alicia confirmed. "I told her Captain Washington is fully in command and handling the turbulence expertly." Jasmine nodded, unsurprised. "Thank you, Alicia. Please make sure your team is seated for their safety." As the minutes passed, Jasmine guided the aircraft through the worst of the turbulence. Her movements were precise and confident, born of thousands of hours facing similar conditions. Gradually, the bumps lessened the ride, smoothing out as they passed through the weather system. Once they were back in calm air, Jasmine made another announcement. Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through the area of turbulence and should have smooth flying for the remainder of our journey to New York. I've turned off the seatbelt sign, though. As always, we recommend keeping your seatbelts fastened whenever you're seated. Our flight attendants will resume cabin service shortly. We're on schedule to land at JFK at 11:03 a.m. local time. For the remainder of the cruise portion of their flight, Jasmine and Ben worked together monitoring systems, updating their approach briefing as they received the latest weather at JFK and preparing for descent. It was the practiced routine of professional pilots who knew their jobs thoroughly. As they began their initial descent into the New York area, Jasmine's thoughts briefly returned to Eleanor Whitfield in seat 2 amperes. The woman who had questioned her very presence in the airport lounge was now quite literally putting her life in Jasmine's hands. It was a powerful metaphor that wasn't lost on her. The air traffic around New York was typically congested, requiring precise timing and coordination. Jasmine handled the communications with air traffic control, while Ben managed the systems and checklists. They were directed into a holding pattern, briefly adding about 10 minutes to their arrival time. Jasmine made one final announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've been placed in a brief holding pattern due to traffic at JFK. We expect this will add about 10 minutes to our arrival time." The weather in New York is partly cloudy with a temperature of 72 degrees. We appreciate your patience and will begin our final approach shortly. When they received clearance to continue their approach, Jasmine once again hand flew the aircraft, guiding it precisely along the assigned route. The Manhattan skyline came into view to their left, a forest of skyscrapers rising from the island. The approach into JFK involved managing crosswinds, not severe, but enough to require compensation. Jasmine adjusted the aircraft's heading to counteract the drift, maintaining their path to the runway with small, precise control inputs. As they descended through 1000 feet, the runway lights became visible ahead. Jasmine made final adjustments, aligning perfectly with the centerline. The 737 responded to her commands, smoothly descending at the optimal rate. At 50 feet above the runway, she began the flare, gradually pulling back on the controls to arrest their descent rate. The main landing gear touched down smoothly, followed by the nose wheel as Jasmine lowered it gently to the runway. She applied reverse thrust and braking, slowing the aircraft as they taxied clear of the active runway. Despite the earlier turbulence and the challenging crosswinds on approach, it had been a textbook landing, the kind that passengers often didn't even notice because of its smoothness. As they taxied toward their assigned gate, a smattering of applause could be heard from the cabin passengers, expressing appreciation for the safe flight and smooth landing. Jasmine allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction. In seat 2 amperes, Eleanor Whitfield sat silently, her worldview having been challenged in ways she likely hadn't anticipated when she boarded the flight. Whether that challenge would lead to reflection or entrenchment remained to be seen, but Jasmine had done what she'd set out to do, performed her job with unquestionable excellence, regardless of who might doubt her right to do so. The 737 came to a complete stop at Gate 22 at JFK's Terminal 5. Jasmine completed the shutdown checklist with the same meticulous attention she applied to every aspect of her job, ensuring each system was properly secured before finally turning off the fasten seatbelt sign. She reached for the PA system one last time. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to New York's John F. Kennedy International Airport. Local time is 11:07 a.m. and the temperature is 72 degrees. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened until we've parked at the gate and turned off the fasten seatbelt sign." After a pause, she continued, "On behalf of Atlantic Airlines and our entire crew, I want to thank you for flying with us today. We know you have many choices when you travel, and we appreciate you choosing Atlantic. If you're visiting New York, we hope you enjoy your stay. If this is home, welcome back. And if you're connecting to another flight, we wish you a safe and pleasant journey to your final destination. Thank you again for flying with us today. As passengers prepared to deplane, Jasmine and Ben completed their final duties in the cockpit, shutting down systems and preparing the aircraft for the next crew. It was a choreographed routine they had performed countless times, each movement purposeful and precise. "Nice landing," Captain Ben remarked as they finished their tasks. "Especially with that crosswind. Passengers probably didn't even notice it." "Thanks, Jasmine," replied, collecting her paperwork. "The wind was right at my limits for a manual landing." They stood and straightened their uniforms before heading to the aircraft door to bid passengers farewell, another airline tradition. Jasmine positioned herself by the exit bin beside her as Alicia opened the door and passengers began to deplane. Many offered perfunctory thanks as they exited, focused on connections or reaching their destinations. Some made a point of complimenting the smooth flight or landing. A few made direct eye contact with Jasmine, their expressions ranging from admiration to lingering surprise at seeing a black woman in the captain's position. The young black girl who had spoken to Jasmine during boarding appeared with her mother, her eyes wide with excitement. "That was so cool," she exclaimed. "Even when it was bumpy, you fixed it." "That's my job," Jasmine smiled. "Keep studying those math and science books." "I will," the girl promised, as her mother mouthed a silent thank you over her daughter's head. As the cabin emptied, Jasmine was aware that Eleanor Whitfield remained seated in 2 amperes, seemingly waiting until most passengers had deplaned. Finally, as the last few travelers filed past Eleanor, rose and approached the exit. She paused before Jasmine, the 2 women facing each other, in a moment weighted with unspoken tensions. Eleanor's confident demeanor from the airport lounge had diminished, replaced by something less certain. That was a very smooth landing, she said. Finally, her voice lacking its earlier imperious tone, especially given the conditions. "Thank you, Miss Whitfield," Jasmine replied professionally. Eleanor hesitated, then continued with visible effort. "I may have jumped to conclusions earlier." At the lounge, it wasn't quite an apology, more an awkward acknowledgement, but it was something. "People often make assumptions based on appearance," Jasmine said evenly. "But those assumptions can prevent them from seeing reality." "I wasn't being." Eleanor began defensively, then stopped herself. "I suppose I didn't consider how my actions might have appeared to you." "It's not about how they appeared," Jasmine replied, her voice calm but firm. "It's about their impact. When you questioned my presence in that lounge, you weren't just doubting my credentials. You were suggesting that someone who looks like me couldn't possibly belong in a position of authority." Eleanor shifted uncomfortably, unused to such direct conversation about the implications of her behavior. For perhaps the first time, Jasmine saw a flicker of genuine reflection in her eyes. "I've flown commercially for 12 years, Jasmine continued. "I've faced that kind of assumption throughout my career. It doesn't stop me from doing my job, but it makes the journey more difficult than it needs to be." Eleanor nodded slightly, absorbing Jasmine's words. "I'll think about what you've said, Captain Washington." "That's all anyone can ask," Jasmine replied. "Safe travels in New York, Miss Whitfield." Eleanor nodded again before finally exiting the aircraft, her usual confident stride somewhat diminished. As the last passenger departed, the cabin crew gathered near the exit, their post-flight duties temporarily paused. "What did she say?" Alicia asked, not bothering to hide her curiosity. "She acknowledged she might have been wrong," Jasmine replied. "It's a start. After that landing, she'd better have apologized," Derek commented. "I've been flying for 15 years and that was textbook perfect through a tricky crosswind." "The crew's waiting for you at the terminal," Maya added with a smile. "I think they've got something planned." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Oh, don't look at me," Ben grinned. "I'm just the first officer." After completing their final duties and gathering their belongings, Jasmine and Ben walked up the jetway into the terminal. To Jasmine's surprise, a group of Atlantic Airlines pilots and flight attendants had gathered at the gate along with several ground crew members. And at the front of the group stood Aaron holding a bouquet of flowers. "What is this?" Jasmine asked, genuinely surprised. Patricia Davis, who had advocated for Jasmine at the Atlanta lounge, stepped forward. "We wanted to properly recognize your first flight as senior captain on this route." And she added with a knowing look, "to show our support after this morning's incident." "Word travels fast," Jasmine observed, accepting the flowers from Aaron with a quick kiss. "Especially when passengers post videos," Aaron replied, showing her his phone screen where a clip of the lounge confrontation was already circulating on social media. Jasmine sighed. Of course they did. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call from the airline's executive offices. The CEO's assistant was on the line requesting a meeting later that week to discuss the incident and Jasmine's exemplary handling of a difficult situation. As the impromptu celebration continued, Jasmine excused herself briefly to make another important call. Her grandmother answered on the second ring. "There's my sky girl. I watched that little airplane icon the whole time on my app. Did you land safe?" Smooth as silk, Grandma Jasmine confirmed finding a quieter corner of the terminal. But there was a bit of a situation before takeoff. As she recounted the morning's events, her grandmother listened quietly before responding. "Not the first time someone's doubted you belong somewhere, and probably won't be the last." "I know." Jasmine sighed. "But each time you prove them wrong, you crack open the door a little wider for the next young woman coming up behind you," her grandmother continued. "That's how change happens, not all at once, but bit by bit, day by day, flight by flight. It's exhausting sometimes," Jasmine admitted, voicing what she rarely allowed herself to acknowledge. "Course, it is, baby. Being first at anything always is. But look how far you've come from that little girl who used to line up her dolls as passengers and fly them around the living room." The memory brought a smile to Jasmine's face. "I made them fasten their seatbelts. Safety first." Even then, her grandmother chuckled. "I'm proud of you, Jasmine. Not just for becoming a captain, but for how you handle yourself through all of it, the good and the bad." As they said their goodbyes, Jasmine promised to call again before her return flight. Rejoining the group, she found herself drawing strength from their support, from Aaron's proud smile, from the knowledge that she had allies in this journey. As they walked toward the crew lounge, Jasmine noticed a young black girl watching her from across the terminal, eyes fixed on Jasmine's uniform on the captain's stripes that adorned her shoulders. The girl couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, holding her mother's hand as they waited at a neighboring gate. Making a quick decision, Jasmine detoured toward them, reaching into her pocket for her spare set of captain's wings, the small metal pins that served as symbols of achievement in the aviation world. "Hi there," she said, kneeling to the girl's level. "I noticed you watching. Are you interested in airplanes?" The girl nodded shyly. "Are you really the pilot?" she asked, echoing the question Jasmine had heard countless times throughout her career. "I am," Jasmine confirmed, holding out the wings pin. "I'm the captain. Would you like to have these?" The girl's eyes widened as she looked to her mother for permission. At her nod, the girl accepted the wings with reverent hands. "Can I be a pilot too?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, Jasmine saw herself at that age full of dreams that seemed impossible, yet burned bright enough to light the path forward. She saw her own journey, reflected in this child's hopeful eyes, the same journey she was helping to make just a little bit easier through her own persistence and excellence. "Absolutely you can," Jasmine assured her. "The sky's waiting for you too." As she rejoined her colleagues, Jasmine felt the familiar mixture of exhaustion and determination that had characterized her career. The path hadn't been easy and wouldn't suddenly become so. There would be more Eleanor Whitfields, more assumptions to disprove, more barriers to break. But today, she had done what she always did, performed her job with unquestionable skill, remained dignified in the face of prejudice, and perhaps changed at least one person's perspective in the process. And somewhere behind her, a young girl was holding captain's wings, seeing a future that might otherwise have remained invisible. That, Jasmine thought, as they exited the terminal into the bright New York morning, made all the difficulty worthwhile. Captain Jasmine Washington's story teaches us that excellence is the most powerful response to prejudice. When faced with discrimination, she chose dignity over retaliation, professionalism over anger. Her journey reminds us that breaking barriers isn't just about being first, it's about creating pathways for those who follow. By allowing Eleanor to witness her expertise firsthand, Jasmine challenged prejudice more effectively than confrontation ever could. She understood that changing minds requires both patience and exceptional performance. The encounter also highlights how microaggressions and assumptions create additional burdens for professionals from underrepresented groups. Perhaps most importantly, Jasmine recognized her responsibility as a role model. That final moment with the young girl demonstrated how representation matters. Seeing someone who looks like you succeeding makes your own dreams feel possible. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is simply excelling in spaces where others believe you don't belong. Call to action. What moment in this story resonated with you most deeply? Was it Jasmine's decision to keep Eleanor on the flight, her perfect landing despite turbulence, or her interaction with the young girl at the end? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever been in Jasmine's position, facing bias in your professional life? Or have you witnessed someone being unfairly judged based on their appearance? We'd love to hear your experiences and how you handled them. If this story touched you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful narratives about overcoming adversity. Share this video with someone who might need inspiration today or who could benefit from reflecting on their own biases. Thank you for joining our storytelling community. Until next time, remember that your excellence is your most powerful response to doubt, and your perseverance creates paths for others to follow.